Good morning, colleagues. Call to order this meeting of the Committee on Finance. The time is 10:05 on Monday, December 9th, 2019. You should have in front of you the minutes per Rule 45 of the November meeting of the Committee on Finance. And, pardon? Okay, November, yeah. Does anyone have any changes or questions about that? I'll give you a second to look at it to make sure if anybody has any objections or questions on it. All right. May I have a motion for approval? Alderman Villegas moves to pass. All in favor signify by saying aye. All those opposed? In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the motion carries. Item number 2 was to modify certain permit fees within the Central Business District, and that item will be held at this time. Items number 3 through 6 are proposed ordinances to terminate 4 TIFs: the Harlem Industrial Park Conservation TIF in the 23rd Ward, Irving Park Elston Redevelopment TIF in Wards 39, 45, and 35, Pershing King TIF in the 3rd and 4th Ward, and Southworks Industrial TIF in the 10th Ward. We're going to have Tim Jeffries come up. He's the Deputy Commissioner of Planning and Development. He'll testify on each one of these, and then we'll call the vote separately at the end of testimony and after any questioning. So, Mr. Jeffries, if you could introduce yourself.
Good morning, Chairman Wagasback and members of the Finance Committee. For the record, my name is Tim Jeffries, Deputy Commissioner in the Department of Planning and Development. I'm here today to request your approval of the early termination of 4 TIF districts. As you said, the Harlem Industrial Conservation Area, the Irving Park Elston, Pershing King, and Southworks Industrial Redevelopment Project areas. On an annual basis, DPD undertakes a review of the city's portfolio of active TIF districts in order to identify districts that are inactive, have no future obligations, or have fully addressed their stated redevelopment goals. In the opinion of the department, these 4 districts meet one or more of those criteria and have been recommended for early termination. Specifically, the Harlem Industrial Park Conservation Area was designated in March 2007 to provide for the coordinated redevelopment within the industrial park. However, the current EAV of the district has fallen below the base, and it is not projected to project increment through the life of the TIF. The Irving Park Elston redevelopment area was designated in May 2009. The TIF was designated to facilitate the development and improvement of the district's commercial, mixed-use, and community facilities. Like Harlem Industrial, however, the current EAV of the district has fallen below the base and is not projected to create increment through the life of the district. The Pershing King redevelopment area was designated in September 2007 to reestablish an economically vibrant neighborhood with affordable housing options. Since that time, the district has supported 3 projects and the creation of 586 affordable units. These projects have been completed and the city's obligations are paid in full. Finally, the Southworks Industrial Redevelopment Area was designated in November of 1999 for the purpose of redeveloping the southern portion of the former USX Southworks Steel Mill. Like other districts, the current EAV of the district has fallen below the base and is not projected to create increment through the life of the district. If approved, these districts will be terminated on December 31st, 2019, and any remaining fund balances will be dispersed back to the respective taxing bodies. I thank you for your consideration. I'm happy to answer any questions the committee may have.
Alderman Sadowski Garza.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Jeffries. I just have, when you say the money will be returned back to the said taxing bodies, does it just go back to the general fund, or where does this money go?
The general fund of whichever share of the levy, of whatever share of the levy those bodies have. So in Southworks, for instance, there's a closing balance of $585,000. 143 of that would be returned to the city. 316 of that would go to CPS and the other bodies down the line.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you.
It does go to their general obligation.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Alderman Riley.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning. So I understand that the Pershing King redevelopment area, basically, mission complete. The deliverables have been delivered, and that makes sense to close that TIF. And it sounds to me that the other 3 TIFs, there's a strong basis for closing those out as well. That said, since you're providing testimony on behalf of the Department of Planning, what then will be the you don't have to go into a great level of detail, but can you reassure the city council that these areas where we're closing these TIFs will still receive the level of attention and planning needed to help lift up these neighborhoods? Obviously, the TIF instrument wasn't the perfect tool in these areas, at least as originally purposed, but TIF districts were contemplated for these areas for a good reason. They're blighted areas that need redevelopment. So where does the department stand on the Harlem Industrial Park Conservation Area, the Irving Park Elston redevelopment area, and the Southworks Industrial redevelopment area as it comes to forward-looking planning to promote economic growth and development in those areas?
Well, I think, big picture, as you know, the Department of Planning is recalibrating how it's looking at planning generally, and it's moving towards the planning regions. I think that there'll be an emphasis on holistic approach to all of these individual areas within those larger regions. As you said, TIF is a tool, and in some cases, I think that while these TIFs aren't functioning how they should be right now, in some cases, it very well could make sense to put another TIF back in place. I'm looking at Southworks specifically. I mean, that's the USX Steel site, tremendous need, tremendous scope of work for environmental remediation and site prep will be needed for that. And when the time comes, when there's a project, absolutely, TIF will be on the table for another district in this area. If and when that happens, it would be a new 23 years, a new evaluation of how TIF can and should work in the area.
Fair enough. So it's a possibility after an evaluation by the department that each of these three areas could get in the future some other form of a TIF district if that is proven necessary to promote investment and growth. Okay, well, perhaps through the chair, the commissioner could get us just an overview of how you plan on tackling these three areas moving forward, given that we're taking away the TIF instrument for each. Thank you, Chairman.
Just one point of clarification. So with or without this action today, 3 of the 4 of these districts generate no dollars today. So in effect, they sort of don't exist, at least to the extent that they're supposed to.
Understood. And again, I'm not in any way challenging the basis for dissolving the TIFs. I suggest that that's a good idea because they are generating some increment, but very little, if any. I just wanted some reassurances that these areas then don't fall off the city's map when it comes to getting creative about promoting economic development and growth using tools like TIF.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Chairman.
Welcome. Alderman Sposato?
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning. Good morning, members of the committee. I was just going to ask you if we could hold number 4 for a little bit till Alderman Nugent got here. She had some concerns about it. So I was hoping we could have held it to the end of the meeting, but you kind of just walked in, so maybe we could give her a few minutes. Do you need a few minutes?
Sure, Alderman Sposato, we can do that.
All
I
right.
actually have a question that can give Alderman Nugent a moment to prepare there.
Okay.
Unless
all
you're ready.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. In terms of the basis for dissolving TIFs, you mentioned these aren't generating dollars. Alderman Riley hit on a couple points there, but what is the general outline for terminating a TIF? What are the key things that we look at for terminating a TIF, other than just the generation of dollars?
Well, I think it's a lack of activity. Has this TIF not been used? Sometimes that's a function of a lack of income generation or increment generation. Certainly, we look at if the projects, are there projects that have been paid out or are obligations been complete, and then has the TIF met its goals? I think that is an easier proposition for smaller districts that are project driven. Is the project done? Has the city paid out its obligations? Yes. That's a somewhat easier question to answer than a large neighborhood-based or corridor-based TIF.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions on that? Alderman Nugent?
Good morning, Chairman, and thank you. I'm just concerned about the sunsetting of this TIF right now. Both Alderman Gardner and I share this TIF, and we're both newly elected aldermen. He and I have both identified some usage for this funds, and we just haven't had the opportunity to effectuate yet. And I'd like to hold on to this funding if possible. I recognize why we sunset TIFs. I'd be willing to have conversations if there's a way to direct some funding to go towards some efforts that could affect both the 39th and 45th Ward, but it wouldn't be in the best interest of the 39th, and I don't believe the 45th Ward if we sunset this right now and we lost this opportunity for funding.
So Alderman, is this the street signs that you and Alderman Gardner were talking about?
Correct. And I have renderings and I have quotes.
Yeah.
Point of information, Alderman Reboyers? Or is it Burnett? Sorry. Alderman Burnett.
Thank you. It's the other short guy. So I just want to ask, Tim, did you have a conversation with the alderman before you all decided to do this?
We have spoken to Alderman Nugent, yes.
Pardon me?
We have spoken with Alderman Nugent, yes.
You spoke with Alderman Nugent and the other alderman that's affected?
I did not speak to Alderman Gardner because we spoke with Alderman Nugent. She indicated that this was a shared position with them. So no, I did not speak with Alderman Gardner.
Hold on a second. Alderman Burnett. Alderman Reboyers.
Distinguished colleague from the 27th Ward done? All right, thank
Okay.
you.
He put his mic down, yes.
So my question is, if it met his if the TIF district met his usual plans, the site, and my colleague is asking for you to hold it, why aren't you holding it?
I think that we were in a position that we said that we were going to work together with CDOT to try to get this resolved by the end of the year and still pursue the termination of the TIF. And that's where we left it. I believe we had a conversation last week about that, Alderman. Is that correct?
We have. We just haven't rectified it with anyone, and so I'm just nervous to give up my TIF without another source of funding to cover the projects we're looking to do. And so I feel like this is the venue where I have to address it.
Is there a, Alderman Nugent, are you finished there?
Yes.
Okay, we can come back to you if you need to. Alderman Riley.
Chairman, it seems that given the lack of conversation with Alderman Gardner, and it sounds like Alderman Nugent is not satisfied with where things stand, I'd like that we hold this item in committee today.
1 second, Alderman,
I'm not necessarily making a motion unless I
Right.
have to, but I would appeal to your good graces, Chairman, to hold it
That's what
to
I'm
allow
thinking
for a
too.
conversation to occur.
Mr. Jeffries, is there a reason this has to be closed out by the end of the year?
We have notified the other taxing bodies, so they are potentially levying against that this year. If you give me a few minutes, I think that we can.
Why don't we
I'd like to
hold,
talk to council
we're going to
first.
hold item, this item, it's number 4. 4, yeah, we'll hold item number 4 until the end, until there can be a conversation, once we go through the other 3 for votes, and we can bring it back. But I'd prefer if you met with them and call the commissioner down immediately to have that conversation. Point of information from Alderman Burnett first. Sorry, Alderman Riley.
Well, not a point of information. I just want to make a statement. Some of the TIFs, like for instance in my ward, some of the TIFs that are in my ward are TIFs that I initiated to encourage the Department of Planning to put in, right? So aldermen should be notified and okay with taking them out, right? Because some of these TIFs, and when I put my TIFs in, this gentleman wasn't working for the city of Chicago. You understand what I'm saying? So some of the folks that work on the TIFs right now may not have an idea of why certain things happen, and they should converse with us and make sure we're all on the same page before they talk to other taxing bodies about,
Closing the TIF.
cutting the deal with other taxing bodies before they talk to us, right? And make sure we all on the same page, because we're all involved with this, and we got to vote on it still. We still have to vote on it.
I agree, Alderman. I think there was just a miscommunication here. I will talk to Alderman Nugent right now, and I think that we can come up with a solution.
We're going to hold
But
this
it's not
item
our
for the,
fault that you talk to the other taxing body. That's your fault.
Alderman Riley?
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, amen to what Alderman Burnett said. I'm getting increasingly frustrated here. I think it's incredibly presumptuous to notify other taxing bodies that these TIFs are going to be closed when, in one case, one of the two aldermen hasn't even had a conversation about it with the administration. I don't think that's miscommunication. I think it's lack of communication. I think that's wrong. Each of us are elected officials who work for taxpayers, just like this administration does. And this needs to be a partnership. It should not be something that is dictated, or we'll get back to you on that. And I don't blame Alderman Nugent for wanting to hold on to this $240,000 or so worth of increment until she has some assurances that local needs are being met. And I think it's concerning to me that Alderman Gardner, who shares this district, has not been a part of this conversation at all. And if this were happening in my ward, I'd be livid. And so I'm not protesting the effort to close out these TIF districts. Based on the department's arguments, I think that it's justified to close all four. But if there's some remaining increment that can be put to good public use, and aldermen have good ideas on that, that needs to be considered first. So I think that I'm hoping this is a learning moment, and that moving forward, there'll be a little bit more engagement on the front end, so we don't have these embarrassing moments in committee. Thank you, Chairman.
Alderman Thompson.
Mr. Chair. The use that Alderman Nugent had mentioned is a qualified use for TIF, and we're going to terminate the TIF and then go find funds elsewhere makes absolutely no sense at all. The whole purpose of the TIF is for the use that my colleague from the 39th Ward is proposing. So why would we terminate the TIF, not use those funds to go find funds from CDOT when we have it right there in the TIF? That's what it's used for. That's what it's supposed to be for. And it makes absolutely no sense. And I apologize, I walked in late, but I walked in to hear enough that I'm glad we're holding this. And I think there's enough concern on this particular TIF that we need to have more discussion on this. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. So we're going to hold item number 4, at least till for now, till the end of the meeting. It's my understanding that Mr. Jeffries personally didn't speak to them, but someone else did?
Yes.
Okay. Someone in planning and development or somebody in CDOT?
OBM.
OBM, okay. Let's hold that one for now, but I want to go back to the other ones. We can still vote on 3, 5, and 6, but before we do that, do we have any questions on 3, 5, and 6? Alderman Beal. And
before we take 3, 5, and 6, has the department talked to any other aldermen in 3, 5, and 6?
Yes. All.
All of them? And all of them are in support of terminating these TIFs?
Yes.
Thank you.
Alderman Tunney. Thank you, Alderman Beal. Alderman Tunney.
Just a quick definition, especially for some of the newer colleagues. So when we do TIFs, it's an economic development tool to improve values in the TIF area. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Sure. Yes.
Okay. So when you say that the EAV, which is the valuation, is not fulfilling or is not meeting, or does that mean that overall the TIFs have not done their job? If EAV is declining?
EAV in all of these districts has declined. I think that is a function of a lot of different forces coming together. I would say that generally TIFs that were designated in the 2006 to 2009 range all have a fundamental EAV issue because
The recession.
the recession, taxes were, the EAV on a city as a whole peaked in 2011, which is reflective of the last 3 years, so starting in 2008. But we have an EAV issue citywide, and then that was compounded by the fact that the assessor changed their formula in 2009, where they, prior to that, all of the fair market values were multiplied by assessment rate of 0.33. And then
Now we're going to
now
go
we're going
back.
by 0.25 and by 0.1. And
Now
so
we're
that,
go-
I mean, there's a big difference between multiplying a $1 million property by 0.33 and by 0.1. And so in a lot of districts, particularly ones that were designated in that time right before the recession, they just hadn't, churned enough. There hadn't been enough time for them to separate past their base EAV, their initial EAV, to get that cushion where they could absorb that change by the state and the recession combined.
So with that, and we have a new assessor, he's going to be looking
Sure.
at this issue again. But as far as if my area is now not going to have a TIF, what are the economic development tools to improve these corridors?
Well, depending on the area, putting another TIF in place, this action today doesn't preclude putting another TIF in place that won't have the same sort of underlying, not in the city's control issues that these 4 districts have. Certainly in some areas, Neighborhood Opportunity Fund is an option, depending on the other kinds of projects for affordable housing, AHOF, LIHTC, those are all still strong tools at the city's discretion.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay. Alderman Thompson.
Mr. Chair, again, I apologize. What wards, so you said you've talked to the alderman. Do we have something in writing?
No, I don't have anything in writing. I personally
Okay,
spoke to Alderman Tabaris.
Sorry, let's just, number 3. What wards affect number 3?
Alderman Thompson, at the beginning of the meeting, we mentioned that the Harlem Industrial Park TIF is in the 23rd Ward, 100%. Irving Park and Elston is in the one that we're talking about
25
here
and
is
39.
39, 45, and 35. Pershing King TIF is in the 3rd and 4th Ward, and the Southworks Industrial TIF is all in the 10th Ward.
Okay, so 4 is here, 10 is here. So they haven't spoken up. Okay, and then how much time is left? I apologize if you said this, Chairman, in each of the TIFs?
If this action is approved or lifetime?
Like, how much time is left? This is an early termination, so there's potentially not much life left if we terminate it next week.
It varies, but there's probably,
Why don't we just break it down each one? What's the termination date of the Harlem Industrial?
I have those, but
This one was 07.
there's about 11 years left in
You just
Harlem.
get, if I could have the termination date.
So Harlem Industrial was set to expire on December 31st, 2031.
2031.
Correct.
That's not soon. Okay.
Irving Park Elston was set to expire on December 31st, 2033.
It's even less soon.
Pershing King is also in 2031. And Southworks Industrial is December 31st of 2023.
Okay, and are these, I don't have the map, so are they, well, it doesn't matter if the alderman is.
Are you looking at percentages for each ward?
I'm trying to look and see, is like the Harlem Industrial Conservation TIF, is it a 3-mile, square mile TIF district? Is it a single building TIF district?
I have those. Harlem Industrial is 93 acres.
How many?
93. Irving Elston is 66. And these are all acreage.
Yep.
Pershing King is 26 acres. Southworks is the largest at 240.
240 acres?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Alderman Urban and then Alderman Osterman.
The questions that Alderman Thompson asked, answered my question as it relates to the wards that the TIFs were impacted in. And just to maybe one question, if you have a TIF going out to 2033, why do you think that there's no room for that EAV to ever come back up?
These ones in particular are just tremendously, I mean, we're not talking about, the balance is $2 million beneath the AAV. We're talking tens of millions of dollars. I can get you the exact underwater figures, but they're very significantly underwater.
And with that, you're projecting no new increment to come in whatsoever.
Yeah,
Are you looking to reset more or less the TIF where you can kind of start it over with today's EAV versus the EAV from when it began?
I think, yes, we're open to that. I mean, in my testimony, I mentioned Southworks. I mean, certainly I expect that I'll be back in front of this committee at some point with another Southworks TIF for when the USX development site comes. I've already talked to Alderman Tabaris. We're going to, her and the department are going to have a conversation and figure out, what are her goals for planning in the ward. I think this dovetails nicely.
No,
with-
that's fair then. If it's that deep underwater and we need to reset that makes perfect sense in that respect. Again, Alderman Nugent's aside, but that strategy does make some sense. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Alderman Osterman.
Notwithstanding the one TIF that there's issues with, I think going through and ending these, I think is a good idea. And I think that before the department comes rushing back with a new TIF, I think that the department should look for other ways to do development in these communities. And I think that the TIF system has been, the biggest hammer in the toolbox, and I think we have to wean ourselves off of that. And these are the low-hanging fruit to do that. It's going to put money back in our tax coffers for our schools and our other taxing bodies. So I think just take back to Commissioner Cox that before you come back trying to do more TIFs, that we want to know what other things you guys are trying to do. So I support it today, and I think you guys should continue to look through all the TIFs. My hope next year for the budget, and I'm not sure if Alderman Dowles here is, kind of go through all the TIFs and kind of see the health of where they're at. So with that, I'll be supporting this.
Yeah, thank you, Alderman. Just one note to everyone. We did vote on this in the budget. They were part of the package, the budget package. But Alderman Lopez?
Thank you, Chairman. One quick question. When Mayor Lightfoot surplused all these TIFs, were these not surplus as well? How do they have balances still?
Surplus, we've declared surplus for 2020, so I think the funds go out during the 2020 calendar year. I would need to talk to OBM specifically about the timing, but the fund balances for these are treated sort of as surplus in the same way that surplus is distributed, but we're legally obligated to put money back to the districts.
So were these part of the mayor's surplus?
The 200 or 300 million, I believe, yes, it was counted in that figure.
So the actual closing balance would be zero, correct?
Correct.
Okay, then where did, Chairman, was this sheet, was this provided by the department or is this from the committee?
I provided that, yes.
That is the sheet with the blue text or the blue on it is from the Department of Planning and Development.
So I'm just, it gives a very misleading picture of what the value of these are if there's no money there, if there's $1 million there.
There is, if you went to the city's FMPS system and pulled the values, you would see those values in the funds right now. I think that.
But you're talking for 2020 having them closed out, correct?
We will.
That's what this.
If this ordinance were to pass in these districts will close at the end of 2019, and their fund balances, which are the closing balances, which I've itemized there, would then be taken, and then they would be dispersed back to the taxing bodies at the levy at which they.
But that's already happened.
No, it has not happened.
So then they're not part of the mayor's surplus.
I don't believe that. I should talk. I'm going to defer to OBM on how surplus actually happens. I don't know what the date is when it's done. I do know that.
Who handles the TIFs?
DPD. It depends on the function, but OBM and DPD certainly both work on TIF districts.
So you're here today on behalf of DPD talking
Correct.
about TIFs?
Correct.
And you cannot answer me whether or not these have already been surplus?
These numbers were counted towards the surplus figure, but the actual mechanics of how surplus versus closing out are slightly different. And so the value of the surplus, which was 300 plus million, I would need to talk to OBM to figure out how those dollars go out exactly. I can say for these 4 districts with these closing balances, the money is there today. They will be there until the districts are closed on December 31st, and at that point,
Assuming that they're
assuming,
closed.
yes, thank you. Assuming they're approved, then at that point, the treasurer's office would disperse them back to the county treasurer, which would give them back to the taxing bodies at large.
Okay. Thank you, Chairman. I think that it would help if we actually had clear answers to this. It's very disturbing, this pattern of not being able to answer things correctly, because I got two different answers to the same question in the last 10 minutes. It's, I think, a very simple question to ask. Thank you.
Alderman Riley.
Chairman, so obviously I've raised my concerns about this. Again, acknowledging throughout that all 4 of these TIF districts should be closed. My issue is with the process and the engagement of the city council. But I also don't want to completely derail this conversation. I wanted to ask Department of Planning to reiterate for the record, the total amount of money being surplused in 2020 budget is around how many hundreds of millions?
300 million.
300 million. So understanding that one of these 4 TIF districts has already served its purpose and delivered the goods, so to speak, that being the Pershing King TIF, and the other 3 are well underwater. $161,900 that remains in the Irving Park Elston TIF in the grand scheme of a $300 million surplus likely will not blow a massive hole in the 2020 budget as contemplated. But again, I do think, knowing that there's that increment there, and the local aldermen have identified good purposes for it, that money should be spent within the district. These other funds, seems like the other aldermen in those districts have consented, and why not proceed? And I'm saying that eventually this Irving Park Elston TIF needs to be closed as well, but maybe we do that as soon as this money has been earmarked for the good purpose that's been identified. So anyway, I just want to make sure my colleagues understand that should Alderman Nugent and Gardner be successful in appropriating this $160,000 or so in TIF increment, it will not result in a disparately imbalanced city budget in 2020.
Right, and I agree with you on process. I think the issue here is that we've already voted on it in the city budget, so, and we have a December 31st deadline?
Correct.
So I would suggest, as all of the aldermen have said, that on the process side of things, it's just made more apparent to the aldermen in those areas that they are closing out the TIF and have that deeper conversation. Not you personally, because I understand DPD commissioner or somebody at OMB has spoken to everyone. So that would be something I think every alderman wants to know before they move forward on these. With that, I'm going to move ahead on 3, 5, and 6, and we'll hold item number 4 for now. On item number 3, we have a proposed ordinance to terminate the Harlem Industrial Park TIF. May I have a motion for approval? Alderman Riley, moved by Alderman Riley. All in favor signify by saying aye. All those opposed? In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and this motion carries. Item number 5 is a proposed ordinance to terminate the Southworks Industrial TIF. May I have a motion for approval? Alderman Villegas moves to pass. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All those opposed? In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and this motion carries. And item number 6 is the proposed ordinance to terminate the Pershing King TIF. May I have a motion for approval? Alderman Sawyer moves to pass. All in favor signify by saying aye. All those opposed? In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and this motion carries. Thank you. But I would, stick around. Moving on to communications from the Department of Law. Item 7, the monthly report of judgment, verdicts, and settlements from the Department of Law for the month of November will be placed on file with the clerk. Yeah. Okay. Items 8 through 11 are authorizations for various entities to engage in various tag day sales around the city. It includes Greenpeace, and I think there's one other one. Right? Just Greenpeace? Okay. And authorizations, just one of them, an authorization for the payment of various small claims against the city, denial of payment of various small claims against the city, and orders authorizing the payment of various senior citizen rebate sewer claims. If there is no objection, I ask that these items be placed on the omnibus. Alderman Lopez?
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to ask, what was the total for number 9? Total cost for the...
And which item,
excuse me,
Alderman?
For the payments of small claims against the City of Chicago. Is that...
I can get that to you through the small claims department. You want just for November?
Yes.
Okay. I'll get that through to everybody through the chair from small claims division. Make a note of that, please. And before we move forward on that, we have one person that wishes to speak on item number 8, Roger Romanelli. Hold on one second, Roger.
Sure.
You sat there? Okay. You can go ahead.
Good morning. Mr. Chairman, I did want to say very briefly that I support this idea to support Greenpeace in our community. But I wanted to clarify, I would like to make a statement related to two city policies that relate to parking meters. Is this an appropriate time? Is this allowed or not allowed at this time?
You can go ahead and speak. This is, we only have one other item, but you can go ahead and speak to that.
Okay, thank you very much. Our association, our Fulton Market Association, supports Mayor Lightfoot's call for new parking meters in our community to boost business accessibility and sales and reduce traffic congestion. At the same time, we're asking this committee and the mayor to address two city policies related to effective curbside use of the public way and off-street parking because we believe they're tied to the success of new parking meters. If new meters are installed anywhere in Chicago, businesses should retain the right to install or expand city curbside business loading zones or standing zones. However, the current process today on loading zones and standing zones is made exclusively, as you know, by our local aldermen. We respect that, but the process today is seen as subjective, and we believe that if parking meters are to succeed, a more empirical process is needed to help businesses who may want loading or standing zones instead of parking meters outside their businesses, because if people park at parking meters, they can park there all day and reload the meters. Therefore, we're hoping for a new city process. If a loading zone or a standing zone is denied by a local alderman, we believe there must be a new official city public appeals process. Or, with due respect, aldermanic prerogative on this issue could be discontinued altogether. Second, we ask this committee and the mayor and the Committee on Economic Development to support a new citywide policy requiring off-street parking for construction workers where new developments receive zoning changes or planned developments. While we warmly welcome new investment in our city and new developments, it's a reality that construction workers are taking away hundreds of parking spaces every day, and this could continue in our community and other communities even if parking meters are installed, since vehicles parking at parking meters can reload indefinitely. New York, Miami, Seattle, and other cities require off-street parking for construction workers where zoning changes or planned developments are granted, and we believe our city of Chicago should look into this as well. We believe this is helpful for the construction workers, for the developers, and for communities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Romanelli. Alderman Osterman.
When we get to a situation when our city's got construction beyond the West Loop, I think it's a great idea. It's a great problem to have. I'm glad that construction workers are paying the meters. To his point about aldermanic prerogative when it comes to parking meters, I wholeheartedly agree with him because I inherited a lot of parking meters in my community. that I did not want, don't want. And while we're here today, if there are any other aldermen who want parking meters and would like some from the 48th Ward, please see me after the meeting.
All right, thank you. Alderman Riley, on parking meters.
Since we're talking about parking meters, just like to remind everybody, I think 85% of the parking meters in the city of Chicago are in the 42nd Ward. And so Alderman Osterman, if you have room in your ward, I'd be happy to send some more to you. But I think that the person who testified earlier raises good points. The success of parking meters in commercial corridors is based entirely on turnover, routine turnover. And my gripe has been that we've had a lot of free parking surrounding the central business district ever since we made the meters in the central business district 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and by far the most expensive in the city. So I'm appreciative that the city departments have identified the need to put this policy in place. My experience working with Alderman Burnett, because we share a border to my west, to his east, is that he has always made himself available to work through these decisions with his constituents. I'm sure in this case he can as well. But again, I think no one enjoys having parking meters in their wards, but if they're going to be put in place, let's make sure they're turning over on a regular basis so that businesses aren't even further impaired by the lack of commercial traffic they need to succeed. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Alderman Riley. All right, we're going to move on to the supplemental agenda. One note, a little PSA before we move on. I understand it was Alderman Taliaferro's birthday today. I thought he was here. Well, but we have a belated birthday wish to Alderman Quinn. Is that correct? He's whipping it up over there. Somebody get him some cake. Alderman Sposato.
Thank you, Chairman. Since we're doing PSAs today, I appreciate a minute to give everybody a friendly reminder about December the 18th for our little event for Isaac. So if you have any question, you don't know what I'm talking about, which I'm guessing you would because I hit you up 3 or 4 times already, feel free to stop and talk to me or my office to talk to the staff about what's going on. Thank you very
Alderman.
much, Chairman.
Okay. So moving on to the supplemental agenda for Committee on Finance, we're going to note that item 1A, Benitez, and item 1C, Godinez, will be held in committee. So we're going to hear from Renee Rodney. She's the First Assistant Corporation Counsel. She will speak to items B, D, and E. We're just doing B, D, and E, right? All right. You want to, up to you guys. Go back to phone. Perfect. We can bounce around to whichever ones you want. If you want to go to Gillespie. However you feel.
Okay. Good morning. My name is Renee Rodney, First Assistant Corporation Counsel. Thank you for allowing me to testify today. The first proposed settlement is Gillespie versus City of Chicago and various individual officers. This proposed settlement would resolve a lawsuit brought by Donna Gillespie as the legal guardian for her son, Shaquille Gillespie. She claimed that the CPD maliciously prosecuted her son for the crime of aggravated battery to cover up their excessive force by falsely stating that he attacked the officers prior to their use of force against him. To limit the city's financial exposure, The Law Department recommends settling this case for $850,000, inclusive of attorney's fees and costs. Plaintiff has dismissed the defendant officers pending settlement with the city.
Do you have any questions on the Gillespie case? Item B. Alderman Dowell moves to pass. All those in favor, please say aye. All those opposed? Alderman Lopez is a no. The item passes. We'll note that Alderman Lopez has voted no.
The next proposed settlement is in the matter of Jones-Rogers versus City of Chicago and 2 individual officers. This proposed settlement would end a lawsuit brought by the family of Tevin Jones-Rogers, who was struck and killed by an SUV that was fleeing from the Chicago police, who were responding to a reported call of gunshots. The proposed settlement of $1.3 million, inclusive of fees and costs, is in the best interest of taxpayers.
Do we have any questions on item D in the supplemental? Alderman King?
Yeah. Question, what was the original offer for D?
In the Jones-Rogers case?
Yes.
One moment. Plaintiff's initial demand was $12 million.
Thank you.
Any other questions on item D? Alderman Cardenas.
Chairman, I guess necessarily just an item D, but are we litigating any? I know there's 5 cases here, but are we litigating other cases, and if so, how many are being litigated at this point?
As far as the entire law department, or with respect to what's on the agenda?
With respect to police settlement cases.
I'll have to get those numbers back to you. We have a number of pending settlements. And are you looking for 2019 year to date or a specific time range?
Well, I mean, 2019.
Okay. Can I get that information to you back to the chair? I don't have those numbers.
And if there's cases that have been going on for years, basically what's on your plate right now? You have cases that have been going on for 10 years, 5 years, 3 years?
We have a range of cases that are newly filed that have been pending for multiple years. So I'll just have to follow up.
Got it. At what point, I guess, trying to get to this, as a contingent liability for budgeting purposes, we set to begin the new year pretty soon. What's the 2020 year looking like for settlements, I should say? So if you look at contingent liabilities, you say, in 2020 probably we're gonna have to settle X amount of cases. And if that's the case, that's your strategy, or that's sort of your structure, how you you just kind of, you face them in year by year as you decide to settle them?
I don't know that information as I sit here, but I can certainly go back and provide it to you through the chair. I'm happy to do that. I didn't come prepared with that type of information today.
Alderman, I think we can, the information that we received in the budget hearings, we can compile that, work with law to get you a little better outlook.
If some of those questions were answered, Chairman, during the budget hearings, that'd be
Probably
great.
not the
It'd
full
be great
scope
to
of
have.
what you're, not the full scope of what you're talking about, though. Or,
Yeah, I think it'd be great for us just to have a clean slate here in terms of police settlement cases going forward. How many are pending? How many are really truly contingent liabilities per the law department? And if out of those, is there a way to straggle those, on a year-by-year basis so that, our budget obviously doesn't get too hard? It'd be great to know what's coming out in the pipeline.
thank you, Alderman. Alderman Sposato?
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, just a point of information. I mean, the law department doesn't really have a crystal ball on this stuff, so we don't know. I mean, they're constantly changing. They could be asking for 1 million at one point, and they lower it to, 250,000. So I'm not sure. I think my colleague is thinking about in the future, not the past, what he's looking for, what's up the road for us, but that's just constantly changing, right, the Corporation Council? I mean,
Right, it
I don't know what information you could really give us other than we have 50 of them in the hopper, and 50 could end up being 25 because we end up settling, and they could be X amount of dollars, and they can go up or down. So that's just my opinion from my, over 8 years in council, how things have been working. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Alderman. Alderman Cardenas.
I think it's not very difficult to ascertain what the amount is. If you're being sued for X amount of dollars, I'd like to know what that is, right? If you're being sued for $20 million, what are the pending cases and what are the suit amounts? And then after that, we can say, usually those get settled usually an average of half that amount or a third of that amount. We can ascertain in terms of what's happening. Just give me the information and I can make my own.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, we're back on Tammy Jones versus City of Chicago. May I have a motion for approval? Alderman Riley moves to pass. All in favor signify by saying aye. All those opposed? In opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the motion carries. And our next item is item E, Gertrude Matanke versus the City of Chicago.
This settlement would end a lawsuit brought by plaintiff Gertrude Matanke, who was walking across LaSalle Street at Lake Street when she was struck by a CPD vehicle, which was responding to a call but didn't have its lights or sirens activated. The plaintiff filed a complaint against the officer in the city, alleging negligent operation of a police vehicle in the course and scope of his employment. The law department recommends settling this matter for $175,000 in the best interest of the taxpayers.
Any questions on Matanke? Alderman Silverstein.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Given the fact that Mrs. Matanke is a family friend and has contributed to my campaign, I wish to recuse myself under Rule 14.
Okay. Alderman Silverstein, thank you. Any other questions? Okay. All right, may I have a motion for approval? Alderman Villegas moves to pass. All in favor signify by saying aye. All those opposed? In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. Motion carries. Yeah, but we're going to, do you want to go to Godinez? Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go back to item C. I had said that we were holding it, but Ms. Rodney would like to present the case at this moment. So if you want to give us the background and facts and the pivotal issue here.
Sure. There's a proposed settlement for $1.2 million in the matter of Godinez versus the City of Chicago and various CPD officers and personnel. The decedent, Herberto Godinez, died while in police custody. Police dash camera video shows several police attempting to subdue Godinez, including one officer who was standing on Godinez for almost 2 minutes. The Cook County Medical Examiner concluded that the manner of death was undetermined and that the death was due to cardiac dyspnea caused by a combined cocaine and ethanol toxicity, and that the physical stress associated with restraint was deemed a significant contributing factor. During the morning of July 20th, 2015, officers responded to a 911 call regarding a disturbance. Upon arriving, the officers heard Godinez screaming and breaking glass inside the garage in the 3800 block of South Albany Avenue. As they approached the garage, Godinez walked out toward them and the officers handcuffed him. 2 more officers arrived, and while the first officer went to speak with the owner of the garage, they stayed behind to restrain Godinez, who was twisting and flailing his body while on the ground. 3 more officers then arrived to assist. All 5 officers attempted to restrain Godinez, who continuously twisted his body and kicked his legs. 1 officer placed his left foot on Godinez's back, placed his knee against Godinez's chest, then leaned down to hold Godinez's arms and shoulders. Another officer placed his foot on Godinez's torso and then his head, but his foot slipped off after approximately 3 seconds. Another officer then kneeled and held Godinez's legs with his hands. Finally, another officer placed his foot on Godinez's upper body for approximately 1 minute and 30 seconds. Once officers zip-tied Godinez's legs, Godinez appeared to have calmed down. A lieutenant who had recently arrived on the scene then instructed the officers to move away from Godinez. Minutes later, Godinez began to twist his body again and maneuvered himself under the back end of a CPD-marked SUV. Officers pulled Godinez out from under the SUV and carried him by his arms and legs to a CPD transport van. There is no video footage of what happened once Godinez was taken to the CPD transport van. Veronica Lopez, a civilian witness, observed Godinez acting erratic as he was being carried out of view of the camera and continued to resist the officers' attempt to place him in the van. At that point, the lieutenant ordered an officer to call for an ambulance, which arrived a few minutes later. The paramedics found Godinez on the floor of the police transport van without a pulse, and he was pronounced dead. The medical examiner's post-mortem examination concluded that Godinez's cause of death was undetermined. Toxicological testing commissioned by the medical examiner found evidence of cocaine and ethanol toxicity in Godinez's system. Specifically, 1,400 nanograms per milliliter of cocaine was present in the peripheral blood at the time of death. Ethanol was also present in the blood, 97 milligrams per deciliter, at the time of death. The combination of cocaine and ethanol in Godinez's blood produced 170 nanograms per milliliter of cocoethylene. Dr. Watkins, the medical examiner, explained cocaine use in and of itself is a well-documented cause of sudden death. Nevertheless, because of the medical examination, of the ME's cause of death determination of undetermined, the Cook County State's Attorney's Office retained Dr. John Scott Denton to provide a second opinion on the matter and cause of death. Dr. Denton categorized the manner of Godinez's death as accidental, with the cause being cardiac dysrhythmia due to cocaine intoxication. Plaintiff's experts forensic pathologists disagreed with Dr. Denton and claimed Godinez died of asphyxia. This asphyxia opinion was supported by evidence of red-brown abrasions on Godinez's neck, fresh hemorrhages adjacent to his carotid arteries bilaterally, and the petechial hemorrhages in his eyes. On October 24, 2017, COPA issued a 70-page summary report sustaining excessive force findings against the officers relating to their restraint techniques, a failure to intervene, and denial of medical care. Specifically, COPA found one officer's actions of stepping on Godinez to constitute an improper application of deadly force, even if the force applied to Godinez did not ultimately cause the death. COPA also found that the officers should have sought prompt medical attention for Godinez because his, quote, appearance and behavior made it obvious that Godinez was suffering from physical or mental illness, severe intoxication, or combination of these factors, end quote. Former Superintendent Eddie Johnson reviewed COPA's investigation, and although he disagreed with COPA's conclusion that the force was deadly, the department agreed with COPA's penalty recommendations. The officers have filed an appeal, and it is currently pending. If this case were to go to trial, Godinez's family will argue that the officer standing on Godinez for more than a minute and a half was excessive and caused or contributed to Godinez's death. While evidence suggests that Godinez died as a result of cocaine intoxication, the medical examiner ruled the manner of death undetermined and found that physical stress associated with restraint was deemed a significant contributing factor. In addition, the court ruled that it would permit the plaintiff's expert to testify. In his experience, the amount of cocaine consumed by Godinez in this case was relatively low. This testimony, coupled with the video evidence of the officer standing on Godinez's upper body, would allow a jury to conclude that the officers caused, or at the very least, contributed to Godinez's death. Even if the city were successful at trial, proving that the officers did not contribute to Godinez's death, the city would likely be found liable for some excessive force based upon the police dash cam video. In addition, photographs taken after Godinez died depict him with a smash-nosed and burned face, which juxtaposed with video of an officer putting his entire body weight on Godinez is likely to be inflammatory. There is also a risk that plaintiff will be permitted to introduce the COPA findings. Plaintiff would use this to argue that COPA has already determined, after a lengthy investigation, that the officer's conduct was unreasonable. Finally, the court is allowing the introduction of Monell evidence against the city. Under this claim, plaintiff alleges the city is liable because, quote, CPD has a widespread pattern and practice of 1, using excessive force, 2, failing to adequately train officers on restraint techniques, 3, failing to maintain video and audio recording equipment and recordings, 4, permitting a code of silence to exist within CPD, and 5, failing to hold police officers accountable for misconduct, end quote. To support this claim, the court is allowing plaintiff to introduce the 2017 Department of Justice report and the April 2016 Police Accountability Task Force report issued in the aftermath of the Laquan McDonald shooting. In addition, plaintiff will be permitted to introduce statements by former Mayor Rahm Emanuel and former Superintendent Johnson on the existence of a code of silence at CPD. Plaintiff will use this evidence to argue that the officers acted in accordance with the findings of the DOJ report, namely that CPD engages in a pattern or practice of unconstitutional use of force. The admission of this evidence would make this case very difficult to defend at trial. Plaintiff will be seeking damages for the pain and suffering Godinez experienced when the officers were restraining him prior to his death. Photographs of Godinez show scrapes, abrasions, and contusions all over his body. His nose appears smashed and his face is bloody. While the city would argue that these injuries are consistent with his erratic behavior as seen on the video, plaintiff will point out that postmortem photographs suggest that the officers used additional excessive force off camera as more injuries appear on Godinez than can be seen on the dash cam footage. The autopsy also revealed internal hemorrhages that the plaintiff's experts attribute to police conduct on the video. In addition, plaintiff claims that the officers caused and/or contributed to Godinez's death. Godinez was 26 years old at the time he died. Although evidence exists that Godinez had many prior arrests and was a gang member, Janet Godinez, the administrator of the estate, will testify that Godinez once saved the life of her child. Godinez has several siblings and parents that would testify about the loss they suffered because of his sudden passing. Even if the city were to prevail on the wrongful death claim, it is likely that the plaintiff will receive a verdict in her favor on the excessive force claim in light of the dash cam video showing an officer standing on Godinez and the extremely prejudicial Monell evidence that the court is permitting. Given that the discovery in this case included approximately 50 depositions and the exchange of more than 50,000 documents, it is likely that any fee petition will likely be in excess of $3.5 million based on a lodestar calculation. Even if this were reduced substantially to reflect plaintiff's lack of success on the wrongful death claim, a determination that is reviewed for an abuse of discretion, any fee award alone would likely exceed $1.5 million. Plaintiff demanded $7 million to settle this case before trial. The parties attended a settlement conference before Magistrate Judge Jeffrey Cummings. After extensive negotiations in two sessions, the parties agreed to a proposed settlement of $1.2 million pending City Council approval. The Law Department recommends the proposed settlement as an appropriate means of limiting the city's financial exposure. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Ladies and gentlemen, before we go into that, we're going to stand in recess for 5 minutes while Corporation Counsel confers. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm reconvening from the recess, and on the record, we will recess this committee until Wednesday at 9 a.m., this Wednesday, December 11th at 9 a.m. Thank you. Meeting adjourned.